Good afternoon, everybody. This is my name is Perihan Abu Zaid. I will be your moderator for the day, and I'm joined by Dr. Tanya Dharamshi, who will give us a lot of food for thought today about today's topic. Before I start, let me introduce you to this series. So this is the Navigating Uncertainty series in partnership with the LightHouse Arabia under the Femtech Hub at the Women's Pavilion in partnership with Meme Foundation, American Hospital Dubai, and Pericare. The Femtech Hub is a space that is honest and open for grounded conversations around women's health with a particular focus on mental and emotional well-being. These are conversations that are designed to be grounded, honest, and reflective of how women are actually experiencing their lives today. So thank you for joining us, and without any further ado, let's get into the topic of today, which is navigating uncertainty for women who are facing medical challenges. Dr. Tanya, let's start with the framing. What happens to a woman psychologically in the moment that she hears about a diagnosis, whether it's something chronic, life-threatening, or hormonal? What happens?
Yeah, so I think when we get a diagnosis, there's a part of that sets in with us where there's, how do I fix this? And I think all humans come from that of needing stability, safety, certainty. Now, as women, when we get a diagnosis, we carry on a role many times as the mother, the daughter, the sister, the caregiver, but we generally carry on a role. And quite often we aren't necessarily aware of how that role is impacting our functionality day to day. We quite often will overextend ourselves. And when we get a diagnosis, it can sometimes be a moment of immediate stop, immediate recognition of how our body is very gently and sometimes not so gently nudging us to say, wake up, we got to do something. And the pace at which you've been running at is not okay anymore. And so sometimes it requires a complete reframing of how we've been doing things, how we've been living, how we've been doing life really over these years, and what needs to shift and change. And that can cause some disruption. That can cause some shakiness inside of us of what does that mean now? Now, how do I shift and change that? And quite often, as the mother or as the caregiver, we carry on that role of being the one that is constantly running to drop-offs, pickups, play dates, taking care of our partners, taking care of our parents, taking care of our children, trying to be effective at work, but we're carrying a lot. And so that diagnosis means stop, but sometimes we don't know how to stop.
Yeah. I've talked to a lot of women who have gone through life-altering medical challenges, and especially cases that have a great deal of uncertainty. And almost all of them say that the waiting and the not knowing is a lot more distressing than the actual news.
Of course, yeah,
Why
because
is that? Yeah.
when we know what we've got, we can all of a sudden sit back and say, okay, now how do I fix this? How do I repair this? What do I do next? We are always searching for certainty. We're always searching for stability. It's the unknown that makes us feel, especially when it's with our body, that there's a betrayal that we've experienced. Our body's not doing what we expect it to do. Sometimes that feels like, why is this happening to me? I've always been in service of someone. Why would it happen to me? How do I stop? How do I slow down? And then there's why is my body not responding the way I want it to? And then not knowing how to repair it. Because when we look on the outside and we see a broken chair or a broken desk or something, we know how to repair that. But when it's a medical condition and it's inside of us, we can't always see it. We don't know how to repair it. We don't know the extensivity of what it's doing. Getting that clear picture and the waiting time all of a sudden becomes the unknown of who's going to continue to take care of my children? Who's going to take care of my family? Who's going to do all the things that I've been doing? And how long? And what does it mean? So we're trying to navigate, how are we going to fill these roles that I play, and not knowing when that stop time will look like. How long do we need to find that support for? What does that diagnosis going to look like? Is it something I can navigate and heal from? Is it something that I don't know what it is? What's treatment going to entail? There's so many questions. And while we're waiting, there's that uncertainty. There's no space for us to say, okay, I can navigate through that. And I think, as you and I spoke a little bit earlier before everyone joined in, many of us may be feeling that even without a diagnosis right now, because of what we've experienced over the last, or since February 28th. And especially yesterday, those of us that are in the UAE, we had some moments of some quietness, some peace, where we were able to go to sleep. We were able to carry on with our day. And then yesterday, things just kind of, we were brought back almost like a really jarring noise to our nervous system. And that uncertainty is back again. How long will this last for? What does this mean? What's going on? And it's very similar when we get that news of something's happening inside of your body, but we don't know exactly what. We still have to biopsy, or we need to get a diagnosis, or we don't know what treatment's going to look like. It's that uncertainty. When's it going to come back again? When's it going to resurface again? When it does resurface, what's that going to mean? Is it going to be loud, or is it going to be quiet? What does treatment look like? We need the certainty. And as human beings with our nervous system, we are programmed to want certainty, to keep our nervous system calm. And when we get sudden news, when we get those alerts like we did yesterday, the nervous system goes into survival. How am I going to survive this? So that uncertainty, that waiting time that we experience, our nervous system is heightened, and we're in fight, flight, freeze mode. We don't know what to do next.
It almost feels that a woman who gets a diagnosis like this is, or maybe like, so in conditions like this, it's like she's going through grief somehow.
Yes. Yeah.
Like like maybe you're denying it, and in the beginning, and you want to be strong and you want to stay strong. But what does that do if that's true? I mean, obviously, we want to talk about the steps of grief throughout, a medical challenge. But in the very beginning, you're trying to stay strong for your kids, for everybody. But what does that do to you psychologically as well?
Yes, but yeah. So we absolutely are going through grief, and grief is something that we will talk about as we go through. What does that look like? I think that sometimes when we get these very critical diagnosis, or have the fear of the diagnosis, because sometimes the diagnosis turns out to be benign, the cyst or whatever it is turns out to be benign, and we're able to let that settle, but that fear still has been incited inside of us. When we get that diagnosis, there is shock to the system, there is an unknown, and there's that certainty. When we look at how we navigate through that, there are multiple ways that we can respond. And I think it's important to understand that no two responses are alike. We will go through this in our own unique way, like our own fingerprint. And that's because we each have our own starting point. We each have our own cultural background. We each have our own previous experiences. We each have our own level of resilience and strength and coping tools that we've used in the past, and our own learned behavioral patterns. So everyone will respond in a different way. Now, that being said, when you talk about being strong, we sometimes will pitch up with that concept of I need to be strong for my children, need to be strong for my husband, need to be strong for my family, I need to be strong for. And sometimes when we do that, we negate what we're actually feeling inside. We numb or tune out what we're feeling. Now, sometimes we do that consciously, and I think it's important to know, are we doing that with intentionality, or are we doing that from an unconscious place? we can do that with intentionality and say, you know what? In order for me to get through this, I am going to actually turn that off, not necessarily focus on what I'm feeling. I'm just going to go into action mode and I'm going to try and find a solution. I'm going to work through my chemo, my radiation, my surgeries. I'm just going to get through it. But I am going to give myself time every day or every week, and I'm going to just jot down, even if it's in point form, what I'm experiencing. Frustration, anger, irritability, loneliness, isolation, lost, confusion, the whole, range of emotions that we can feel, but we jot it down. And then we give ourselves permission. Sometimes it's every weekend where we sit in silence with ourselves and review that. Sometimes we say, I'm not going to do this until I'm done my radiation, my chemotherapy, or my surgeries, until I get an all clear or until I know what I'm navigating with. And then I'm going to intentionally sit with it. Now, when we do that with intentionality, we actually are honoring what we're experiencing and giving ourselves the space to shut it down and to focus. Sometimes that's what we need to do. But if we do it without intentionality, and we do it and we just say, can't do it, and we tuck it under the rug, it does come back. That's when we have what we call a delayed response. So what we can have happen here is a hyper arousal, a hypo arousal, or a delayed response. Hyper arousal is sometimes what we see with the panic, the fear, the agitation, what's going to happen, and that nervousness. Hypo arousal is when we're a bit more sullen, quiet, removed, more inward, but feeling very heavy and low. The delayed response is when we just get on with it, crack on, and just do what we need to do. These are the ones that I worry about because these are the ones we reward. Wow, they're so strong. Look at them. Look at how they're navigating through this. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't still do that. But if we do that with intentionality and we say, right, I'm going to acknowledge what I'm feeling, put this in a book, put this on the side. When I have the capability and the capacity to navigate through this, I'm going to sit with a therapist, I'm going to sit with someone, I'm going to go through my support groups. We can then avoid any traumatic responses later on down the road. If we don't, though, that's where we have the delayed response. When after tucking it under the rug starts to rot and it comes back. And when it comes back with a fervor. So we want to really make sure that we are taking that time to acknowledge what we're feeling, giving ourselves permission to sometimes not feel, but to say, I will navigate through this later on. Otherwise, yes, we do run the risk of shutting ourselves down.
Yeah, no, this is very powerful because especially the point of rewarding rewarding women that have that delayed response and act strong and I want to tie that to even identity. If that is you, if you're a high functioning woman who has that identity of having superpowers and is always praised for doing things, strongly or special, and then you get that reward, you're almost not given permission to feel what you need to feel. How does identity here? Because also I hear a lot of women say that I don't feel like myself anymore. But if you're not even allowed to even say that out loud, what does that really mean? So can you talk to us about how medical challenges can affect identity and
Yeah, it's a hard one. When we carry that role of I'm the strong one, I'm the one that provides and takes care of everyone's feelings, emotions at home, then I go to work and I'm, like you said, superpower, I keep going. What I worry about with that being our identity is that we're not giving ourselves space to feel what we feel, irrespective of a diagnosis or not. Where I would ask everyone, not just women, but everyone to reflect on where that identity comes from. Because sometimes the overachiever is actually showing up as the overachiever because we're feeling something else behind it, right? Everything needs to be 100% perfect because if it's not, then I've failed. I need to be doing everything spot on and being the most loyal person you can imagine. Well, because if I'm not, then do I have anyone that actually values me? Maybe I'm not valuable. I need to be the one that works well under pressure. But behind the scenes, are we noticing the amount of time that we're feeling overwhelmed and we've actually avoided addressing something because we feel it's so overwhelming and so expansive within us? So I always say, let's always recognize that when we carry that identity as having superpowers, sometimes that comes from a wounding that we've experienced earlier, that need to be all and do all. But no one is 100% everything. We're setting ourselves up for failure in that moment in and of itself, because we're not recognizing that failure isn't weakness. Failure is actually when we grow the most, because when we face something challenging and we explore it, we experience it, we give ourselves permission to feel all the feelings in the feeling wheel, and we give ourselves permission of expansion in that time. It's only through darkness and contraction that as we come through that storm, we actually look back and go, oh, I have expanded and I've grown and I've realized the depths of my strength coming through that storm. Right? So I think when we look at identity, I would say whether or not we've got that diagnosis, I think, and women are really hard on ourselves. We really are. In many cases, sometimes we're our worst enemy because that critical voice roars so loud within, where we take that step back and feel like, I need to be the one that works 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I need to be the one that takes care of my children and they're getting everything that they need from me. Need to make sure that there's a meal on the table. Need to make sure that I look good and I'm not aging and there's no gray hair on my head and wrinkles. No, they can't exist. And, God forbid we look a little exhausted, we're back out to Sephora to get the makeup that we need to cover it up. But nowhere in there are we sitting back and saying, that's humanly impossible.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's humanly impossible. And I think sometimes as we've taken on these roles, and maybe that's, a different discussion for another day, but when we look at what capitalism has done for us and very nuclear families, we've removed ourselves from support networks. We've removed ourselves from having people around us to help us do all these things that we used to do when we lived in more extended family units or lived within smaller communities where we had our people around us, where we reached into each other. Now we're trying to be superpowers. And for women, we have taken on these additional roles, but we haven't reduced all the other things that we used to do before we got into the workspace. So I think that's one area. Then when we've got a diagnosis on top of that, we're trying to navigate so much more, and we're not giving ourselves space to be human in that space.
Not at all. On the point of grief, I remember when I lost my late father, there is a friend of mine who told me, who's gone through a similar experience, and she told me, trust me, grief is a beautiful process. And that made me mad. I was like, what could be beautiful about that? And what she meant is that when you walk out of it, like when you go through all of the steps and you see yourself also learning from it and standing strong on your feet, because when it first happens, you feel that you can't live anymore, right? And I imagine a diagnosis maybe could be similar, that you feel that, you're not yourself anymore, that life is not going to be the same anymore. So you're going through grief. Maybe you're not accepting it much, but does grief look different for some when it's not death?
So I think first it's important to identify that grief is not only for death. Grief is when we experience the loss of something that meant and had a role for us in our world, whether that's loss of a relationship, whether that's loss of a loved one, whether that's loss of a job, loss of a home, whether that's moving to a different environment. Grief is when we are experiencing something and we have lost it. So yes, a diagnosis most definitely can make us feel grief, because the way that we once functioned is no longer something we can rely on or depend on. So there's a shifting that happens. Grief is not something we ever go through. So I think if I could just open that up a little bit, Grief is something that stays with us. It never ends. It never looks the same with any two people. And it is a journey, and it shapeshifts across time. It doesn't look the same from the beginning to 2 years from now, to 10 years from now, to 20 years from now, 50 years from now. And when I think of the stages of grief, which sometimes, and some of you may be familiar with Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, the stages of grief, sometimes people mistakenly say it's linear, and when you're done one stage, you go to the next stage. Unfortunately, it's not that case. Grief is messy. Grief is not linear, it's messy, and we don't know what's going to come the next day. So I almost like to define it as standing with your back against the ocean and having the waves touch you super gently one day where we know, okay, yeah, I've got a diagnosis, okay. And sometimes the next day it'll wash you over and you're on the bottom of the sea or bottom of the sandbanks, and you're trying to get up, trying to find your feet, and catching your breath is painful. And then the next day we go back into shock. Am I really standing at the beach with my back towards the ocean? And then the next day we're bowled over, and then some days it just touches us gently. So as we go through a diagnosis, initially I would say, yes, we get shock. Is this really, what does this mean? What is this? We try and find out, how do I fix this? How do I navigate through this? But as we go through grief and we go through the stages, there's shock, there's disbelief, there's denial, there's deep sadness and worry, and there's anger, and there's acceptance, and then we try and find meaning around it. But before we get to meaning making, we're back at shock again, and then we're bounced over to anger, and then we're in disbelief again. So we're all over the place. So I would say that grief is not linear. It is not something that makes sense. And sometimes as we try and make meaning out of it, sometimes we're trying to make meaning out of something that we just never can get the meaning for. And that's painful.
Yeah. So sometimes you just need to let go and accept that you may not really understand, but something will come. But it's not easy. And you mentioned being intentional, like the intentionality behind it all. What does that really mean? Like if I received a diagnosis and I'm going through this all of this, how can I be intentional about about my well-being
Yeah.
and the journey?
So perhaps this would be a good time for me to share a little bit about my story. I am a cancer survivor.
Wow.
And about 4 years ago, we're almost at the 4-year mark. So every year I have my celebratory little bouquet of flowers that come to my, okay, so not a little bouquet, it's quite a large bouquet, and I'm okay to splurge and treat myself that way. But when I say intentionality, when we first get our diagnosis, there is shock, but there is also the recognition that, especially, at my time, I had the recognition of being a mother, 2 daughters. One was preparing for her final exams, husband, family, having my role, my job. And if I wanted to get through what I needed to get through, when it was the biopsies and then the radiation and the surgeries, to get through all of it, if I would have sat in that moment and let my feelings take over, I don't think I could have showed up as mom. I couldn't have been able to be, I don't think I would have had that capability to go through my treatments and to get that courage to say, okay, yeah, treatment's done. I got to get up. I got to walk. I got to, I got to lean in. I got to, identify that, yeah, husband, you're coming with me and we're going for the walk. Or yes, daughter, yeah, let's sit down and let's just have a healthy meal together. Let's play cards together, right? I wouldn't have been able to do it. So what I did was show up with intentionality. And that was for me to say, right, I have this diagnosis. I have to go through this journey. I have to make some decisions. And I know that I'm not going to be able to be aware of all of the information that's coming my way, because cognitively, what happens in our brain when we get a traumatic news or we experience something traumatic, our frontal cortex, our logical mind shifts off and we go straight into survival. We want to survive this. So recognizing that I might not be able to take in the information the way that I would like to, in a way that actually makes sense for me, to be able to say, oh, okay, well, what does that mean? What's the chances of survival? What does surgery look like? What removes, what doesn't remove, all those sorts of things. So it was bringing my partner with me, so making sure my husband was there. My sister flew in, so I had two beautiful minds on, switched on with mine as well.
Amazing.
So I make sure that I brought my resourcing. I found my village, I found my people, and gave myself permission to say, okay, there are days when I'm going to feel, and there are days when I'm just going to need to power through. What do I need? So I resourced myself. And I took time to write down things of what I was feeling in the moment. I made sure that I gave myself space. If I needed to cry, I would cry. And if I didn't, I would say, okay, that's fine. I'm not feeling anything. I'm giving myself permission to not feel as well. Because sometimes we sit back and go, I got to be stoic. Well, no, I can sit back and say, today I'm giving myself permission to not feel. Today I'm giving myself permission to feel. So I'm not trying to say I have to shut down. I'm saying I'm giving myself permission to show up in this way. So intentionality there. And then when it was done and I felt like, okay, yep, I got the all clear. We're done. We're good. We've done treatments. We've done surgery. We got the all clear. Now I can sit back and go, what did that storm look like for me?
Mm.
And I look at the photographs. I look at the conversations. I look at the emotions that I felt. And I stayed in that space and said, okay, now I need to talk to someone. As a psychologist that works with trauma and grief, I knew what I was experiencing. But yes, I needed to have my therapy around it. Yes, I needed to experience it because guess what? I too am human. And so while I can name what I'm feeling, I know what I was going through, I also sit back and say, I need support. I need the help. And I need to process those moments where I felt angry, where I felt my body betrayed me, where I felt like maybe husband could have pitched up a little bit more, even though he did the best he could. But, there's those emotions sometimes that come up. Then there's moments where I say, wow, that was really tough for me to have to be the role of the mom. And I wish I didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
But then I also sit back and say, I didn't, yeah, I made mistakes. Yeah, it was tough. But wow, my ship got banged up. I'm going to fix it a little better this time. I'm going to do things a little differently. But my ship held up. And I'm also going to give myself compassion and grace for the moments when my ship did get banged up as I went through that storm, but also grace and compassion, knowing that storm was rough and rocky.
Mm.
So giving yourself that space to explore it with intentionality to say, I'm not going to hold myself to that standard of 100%. I'm not going to do cancer perfectly. I'm going to do cancer the way that cancer needs to show up with me. And I'm going to do it the best way I can. And if that means I'm going to cry sometimes, I'm going to cry. If that means I'm going to laugh, I'm going to laugh. If that means I'm going to scream and shout, I'm going to scream and shout.
Yeah. You mentioned your husband a couple of times, so let's talk about
Yeah.
relationships because a lot of
Yeah.
women would say that journey makes them feel so lonely, even when, the loved ones are trying their best. But why do women feel lonely when they're going through medical challenges, and what can be done about that? Because we don't want them to walk out with bigger losses, right?
Yeah. And sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes we come out and our partners in their heart of hearts feel like they were there for us the whole way. And sometimes they were and sometimes they weren't. So when we talk about that loneliness that we feel, I think this goes back to that initial conversation that we had of that us needing to be superpowered women, do it all, carry it all. And we don't always give ourselves permission to say, I need you. I need you to hold my hand. I'm scared. I need your support. Sometimes we take that on as an expression of our emotions as weakness and vulnerability, without recognizing that expressing what we feel is courageous. It takes courage to say, I need help. And courage is strength, not weakness. So expressing our vulnerability is something we don't give ourselves permission to do very often. And what ends up happening is we come out feeling very lonely and isolated because we haven't said, hey, husband, I need you to sit here. You sit in silence with me, tap on your laptop. I don't care, but please don't go to work today because I just need to feel your presence with me. We don't always do that. Sometimes we say, no, he's doing the best he can. He has to go to work and it's my role to support him. And so I got this. And we toughen up a little bit, right? And so what I would say for anyone that is out there that is struggling, ask for help. Go to your partner because they genuinely want to help. They just don't know how. And remember, when we have our partners with us, there's a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, powerlessness that they also sit with because the person that they love is hurting and they don't know how to fix it. And so when we sit back and we say, I need your help here, they'll jump at it. But quite often they will sit back and say, I don't know what to do. So they'll hide. They'll hide with work. They'll hide with all the busyness of the things that keep their brain occupied. So they don't have to be in that space of, I feel helpless. I feel hopeless. I don't know what to do. So help them out a little bit and say, hey, I need your help. I need you to help me with making sure we got meals for the week. Or I need your help to just hold my hand. I need you to be there when they do a biopsy. I want you there in the room when they give me the news or the diagnosis. I need you to help me find my doctors or my surgeons. I want you there by my side when I'm going through my radiation or chemo. Tell them how to help you. I promise they'll most likely show up and rock up.
Maybe
But
part of it also
we don't
would be
tell them.
yeah, maybe also absolutely, and maybe part of it would be also tolerate my tantrums sometimes. That
Yeah,
this is not
absolutely.
this is not me. This is just the disease talking or my frustration from it. You reminded me of this cultural concept that's very common within the Arab world. I don't know if it's common in other cultures as well, but the idea of not wanting to be a burden on anybody.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I've heard my parents say that. I've heard my husband like, I don't want to ask for help because I don't want to burden you. And I can't imagine when you're already burdened with big medical challenge and you're taking on this responsibility and you're being praised for taking it all in and be acting strong and all of that.
Yeah.
Asking for help is not easy at all.
No, it's not.
Yes. No.
It's
So
not.
what is there like anything that women can like practice to or maybe vocabulary they can use to put themselves in that mental state to be able to actually verbalize what they're truly feeling and
Yeah.
accept that they're feeling weak, uncharacteristically weak, and ask for that help?
Yeah. So I think, when we go back and we look at the way that society operated before we have this new way of being with husband, wife, children, living in a nuclear family and in one home, we lived amongst other people and everyone had a role and everyone engaged in that role. And so sometimes you would have some women being the ones that took care of the children, the others would be cooking the food, the others would be, taking care of the clothing, other people would be doing, everyone had a role. And no one ever thought at that point, oh, you did the cooking today, I'm burdening you. No, it's part of what we do because we lean into each other. But our culture has somehow evolved from that of my value is only worth anything if I am not extending onto someone else. But in that way, we are negating the role of developing beautiful relationships where we have the opportunity to show up for one another with compassion and empathy. We are making ourselves very isolated and insular. And I wonder if someone were to come to you and say, I've just received a cancer diagnosis. I need help. I need support. I wonder if we would turn around and say, they're being such a burden. Chances are we wouldn't do that. We would actually feel like, okay, I can be of help. I can be of service to someone, because that too is innately within us. We want to be with other people. We want to be around people. We want to feel that sense of giving, and we have that nature within us. We have that as children when we're born. When you look at little children that play with each other, a little child that's crying, another one's going to go over and sit beside them, try and help them, right? They're not going to think, oh, that kid over there that's crying, they're a burden. They're going to go over and say, oh, put my arm around you, or you want my biscuit, you want my toy, you want my cookie, something, right? Because we're humans. We acknowledge the suffering of others. We absorb the emotions. And so really, when we say, I don't want to be a burden, that's coming from within. But when we can give ourselves permission to know we deserve simply for being born. We were born, therefore we deserve. And now that doesn't mean I deserve the Maserati or the Ferrari. That means I deserve to be acknowledged. I deserve to be witnessed. My life is worth something when it's witnessed. The value of my life is through acknowledgement and through companionship, through witnessing, through sharing of my journey. And so when we give ourselves permission to share our journey, to allow ourselves to be companioned through that journey, we no longer see ourselves as a burden, but we see ourselves as connecting and sharing through compassion and empathy.
Okay, before I get into questions, there is something that I want to address, which is almost a contradiction in the mental state that a woman, in the extreme case of a life-threatening or a life-altering diagnosis like cancer, what you've gone through, there is the part where you have to pause and reflect and give yourself grace, like you said, and feel what you need to feel. But there's the part that's telling you you cannot, like the responsible part, that you got to take care of your family. You got to keep going back to work. You got to earn more. You got to save. You got to do, like, take care of all things that were left unplanned for, and that is such a difficult mental state to be in. Like,
Absolutely.
how could that, like, what does that feel like? And what would you advise a woman who's going through something like this right now?
Yeah, it is overwhelming. It is. And you're absolutely right. It does feel like such an extreme contrast, where on one end, we're feeling we're having a lot of existential questions. What do I do next? What's my purpose? What's my value? What's the meaning? Am I going to be dealing with end of life questions? Am I going to be navigating how do I take care of my children when I brought them into this world and maybe they don't have their mother here? We start asking all of those questions. And then on the other hand, it's, well, I still got to rock up and go to work. My kids are here, right now. I still got to show up there. And it can feel like we're pulled and we're constantly pivoting and having to figure that out. That's exhausting. So I would say 100%, it's exhausting because it does require that constant shift. And one allows us to be in that space of emotions, and the other one says, shut that down. No space, no room, right? So I go back to that point of making sure that we are engaging in essential self-care, making sure that we are taking the time to reflect on what we're experiencing, what we're going through, but also giving ourselves permission to pivot and to say, okay, right now I need to focus on work, and that's what I'm going to focus on. And when I'm done work and I have that 20 minutes every evening, or I give myself 30 minutes every evening, that's when I'm sit down and I'm going to journal, I'm going to write, and I'm going to go for my walk, or I'm going to do my breath work, or I'm going to make sure that I sit in the bathtub for a little while, where I allow myself to go swimming, or I allow myself to have some quiet moments for myself, where we engage in that self-care and we give ourselves that space. It's important for us to regularly when we wake up in the morning, do our breath work, check in with our body. What are we feeling? What are we noticing coming up? Don't pick up our phone first thing. Make sure that we are giving ourselves 5-10 minutes to just shift from sleeping to what's coming up for us in the day, because it can feel overwhelming. It's overwhelming without a diagnosis. With a diagnosis, sometimes just getting through the first half of the day feels like an overwhelming task that we just don't know how we're going to do it. So check in with yourself. Give yourself permission to go half a day by half a day, sometimes not even half a day, sometimes hour by hour. And at the end of every hour, slow down, take a deep breath in, walk, move, take in some sunlight, go outside, feel the air on your skin, the temperature on your skin, shift it. Look for soothing of your 5 senses, but every hour, take that pause, reset. Every, half day, make sure you engage in 10 minutes of breath work, right? Those of us that pray, and if we pray 5 times a day, if we're religious and we pray 5 times a day, I will always say, use this as a bit of a cheat sheet. Everyone will interrupt you when you're on a call. People will interrupt you when you're in the bathroom. People will interrupt you when you're taking a shower. There seems to be no respect for when they're going to interrupt you, except for when you're on the prayer mat. Yes. No one dares to interrupt you when you're on the prayer mat. So I will always say, take 2 or 3 extra minutes when you're on the prayer mat. Imagine 5 times a day times 3 extra minutes on the prayer mat. You've hit 15 minutes of extra meditation time. It's uninterrupted, right? Nobody ever does that, right?
Yeah.
And if I say take 15 minutes every day to meditate, people will sit back and say, can't do it. But 3 extra minutes on the prayer mat, when you've given yourself some time of quiet and solace, that's powerful. 3 extra minutes, a total of 15 minutes, when you've actually given yourself that time to reflect and that time to do some deep breathing. Sitting at a traffic light. How many times do we go through the traffic light? And we're changing songs, we're looking outside, whatever. Do breath work. At 2 minutes of traffic light signal, at 10, 5 traffic lights, you've got 10 minutes that you've just given yourself of breath work, right? So it's about finding little tips and tricks before we go to bed at night. Breath work, journal. When we hug our children, when we hug our loved ones, we often just go for a quick 2-second hug, but our nervous system loves pressure. So when we hug, and we hug someone that we love, that we care for, and we get that nice tight hug, hug for a few seconds longer. Hug for 8 seconds or 10 seconds. Smell your child. Regulate your breathing with your husband. And I'll always do this with my husband. I'll say, no, we're not getting out of this hug until we're both breathing in and out at the same time. He's like, oh, Tanya, right? But we'll always do that, right? And then he'll say, okay, now I got to get back on my call. Okay, fine. Thank you. You regulated with me. We're good, right? But it's about finding little micro habits that allow us to pivot from that moments of I need to be held, I need to be seen, I need to be witnessed, I need to give myself that space to, okay, right, now I got to go back to work. But micro habits help us transition through that time.
Amazing. All right, let's get some questions.
Sure.
Are distractions good, or they're just a fast track to burnout?
Great question. Distractions are good in the moment. They feel good in the moment, but they don't build up our resilience. Okay. So now I want to qualify, just put some nuances around distractions. Sometimes when we need to just power through and get through our radiation or our chemo or our surgeries, yeah, distractions are good, like having our children around, having our girlfriends around, having that chit chat, having that, that chin wag with our friends, whatever it is. Those are good distractions because we're connecting and we're sharing and we're interacting. If our distractions are doom scrolling, Netflix, substance use, an extra glass of wine here and there, or, using tablets or pills or anything else. Sometimes some of my clients will even say, I love online shopping. I never hit checkout though, because I know that I would considerably damage my credit card bill. But I online shop and I keep looking, scrolling through things that I'd like to purchase, putting it in the cart, then never check out. That too is a distraction. But what that does, and sometimes in the moment that feels great. I'm not going to deny it. It feels great to go, oh, that looks really good. Or yeah, that Netflix show. I love to watch series and we just kind of get into it. Like when we, I'm definitely guilty of this when I binge watch Bridgerton when it comes out, and my husband's like, "Oh God, here we go," and I'll be like, "Shh, don't talk. This is the scene," But we're not using it as a form of distraction in those times. We're using it as a form of connection and watching and, not, just kind of relaxation. But when we're using it as distraction, we're removing our ability for resilience. Resilience only comes from when we acknowledge the pain that we've experienced, we acknowledge the challenges, and we reach deep within to soothe and to find our own trust in ourselves of being able to go through the challenges. Now, when we say surrender, sometimes surrender can be a frightening word because surrender can sometimes feel like I'm giving up. And that's not what surrender is. Surrender comes from when we develop that resilience of, I trust myself to get through whatever it is that comes my way. I don't need to control it. Now, when we engage in numbing behaviors or distracting behaviors, we're doing that because we're numbing an over surge of emotions, an overwhelm of what we're feeling or thinking. Sometimes it's nice, like I said, but sometimes when we lean into ourselves and we learn our own sense of trust of how much strength we have within us and our true tools that we develop within ourselves, we learn to trust that whatever comes our way, we have the capability to navigate through it. So we no longer need to have that certainty of everything around us because we know within us with certainty that whatever comes our way, we'll navigate through it. That doesn't mean it's not going to hurt. That doesn't mean it's not going to be painful. That doesn't mean we're not going to feel lonely sometimes. Absolutely we will. But we know that we have the tools to navigate through it.
Very nice. Another question we have. Oh, you just mentioned when you talked about distraction, I was like, work cannot be distraction because work was just add
Yes,
stress.
it is. But
So
work is a distraction. Yes. Work is
yeah,
a distraction because it takes our mind off of things.
yeah.
So what
Is
are
it a
the
healthy
things?
distraction though?
Depends.
Mm,
Depends. It can be healthy if we have something we absolutely have to deliver on time and we actually, we want to rock up and we want to do our best and, really show up and prepare and make sure we're ready for things. But if we're using it to numb away, so sometimes I hear partners say, Tanya, I didn't know how to help my wife when she was going through cancer, so I just worked. Because in that space, I felt useful. In that space, I felt like I could control something. With my wife, I didn't feel like I could control it. I could control the outcome. So in that case, no, it's not a healthy distraction, right? It's healthy because it helps them feel like they have the space to control something, but not healthy for your relationship with your wife and not healthy with supporting your wife through a very, very difficult time.
Yeah, interesting. We have
But
a
yes,
question
work can be a
here.
distraction. Yeah.
Yes. Um, how do we this is a question from one of the audience. How do we overcome the fear of actually letting ourselves fear? Oh my God, that is loaded.
How do we
So
overcome the fear of letting
if
ourselves
you're
feel?
if you're scared to feel what you need to feel, if you're again like going through something very stressful like this and you don't know what might happen, you might actually not even you might be scared of feeling what you're feeling.
Yeah. Not only would we be afraid to feel, but sometimes we don't even know how to identify and name what we're feeling. Sometimes just, just saying, how am I feeling right now feels like, I don't know. I don't even know how to name it. It's moments like that where I would say, check in with your body. Your body gives you a lot of messages. Sometimes we'll notice jaw pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, gut pain, chest pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, inability to digest food, not hungry, overeating, chronic headaches, muscle aches and pains, the list go on and on. Our body tells us something. So in those moments when we can't even identify what we're feeling, I would say reflect on what is your body feeling. Sit with the sensation that you're feeling in your body. Be curious with it, rather than say, I need it to stop, which is what we do. We fight against the current. We just want that feeling to stop. And we say, I don't want to go there. I don't want to feel it. We're fighting against the current. But what if we leaned in and we decided to just say, putting on a life jacket, and I'm just going to go and float in the direction of the current. Let's see what it takes me, knowing I have my life jacket on, and I'll be able to navigate wherever I land. Remember, that's trust in yourself, trust in your own abilities. It's okay, this may be frightening. This may feel fearful for me. I may experience something that I've never experienced. I may feel something I've never felt before. But I'm going to give myself permission to go there. Start with my body. What am I feeling in my body? Start connecting with that sensation. So sometimes, I may end up with a bit of jaw pain, wake up in the morning. And certainly these past 2.5 months have, I think, brought on a lot of different aches and pains in our body than we felt before, right? Sometimes you wake up in the morning and have jaw pain. Rather than me saying, oh, that jaw pain is horrible, I just want it to stop, let me go take a brufen. I will sit back and gently massage it. Hold it. What are you telling me? You're telling me that I clenched my teeth all night. Okay, so what am I processing? What am I holding tight? What am I not opening my mouth up about? What am I feeling in there? Right? Connect with it. What does it want me to know? What does it look like? What does that energy feel like? Right? If I'm noticing in my gut, it feels really raw and red, feels inflamed. Okay. Maybe my emotions feel a bit inflamed. Maybe I feel a bit raw. Maybe I feel red with anger. Right? Connect with it. Right? When we start to give ourselves permission to feel what we feel and we move away from the fear of what we feel, we're starting to recognize all of the strength that we have within. The fear, yes, it can feel frightening. It can feel overwhelming, but sometimes knowing that emotions are not fact is helpful. A feeling is just a feeling. It's not fact. And sometimes the feeling is very different from the lived experience. And so when we notice the feeling, we notice the fear, we can acknowledge it, we can feel it, we can explore it, but then we can also say, that's just a feeling. That isn't necessarily what my reality needs to be. And I can engage with different things that allow me to shift my feeling to change the outcome of what I'm experiencing. Feelings are not fact.
100%. We have 3 more questions, but I would actually combine them because they sound similar. So one, basically, they talk about this again, uncertainty kind of almost taking control over our thinking, and especially with the conditions. Even if you're undergoing treatment, maybe your treatment would be put on a pause, or be affected by everything that's going. And then there's another lady saying that lately she's just been feeling this constant sense of uncertainty about her life in general. But all of them, they're asking, what can they actually do to kind of rebuild that confidence and maybe create a routine and manage that, maybe speaking up and talking to somebody and trying to get some assurance that maybe if your treatment is delayed, it's not really going to affect your prognosis or something. Maybe that could help. But what else can we do? You give us some very good tips about listening to your body. Is there anything else that can help us just kind of drop that feeling or not be controlled by it at the very least?
Yeah. uncertainty, when it comes in, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
It can be quite strong, and it takes over. And we need to know what is going to happen in the next hour, in the next 2 hours, in the next 5 hours, the next week, 10 days, 2 months, 1 year. We love to, which is why we do so much planning. We love certainty. And this comes at a time, not only from a diagnosis perspective, but also from an environmental perspective where uncertainty is all around us. Recognizing that we need certainty and we don't have it can feel very challenging and very overwhelming. So what I would say is lean into what we can have certainty about, right? We need to find those things that we can have certainty about. And that could look like I have certainty over what my next hour is going to look like. I have certainty over what my morning routine is going to look like. I'm going to wake up, I'm going to brush my teeth, I'm going to do some breath work, I'm going to change into my clothes, I'm going to grab my cup of coffee, I'm going to have a conversation, I'm going to have a call. But we lean into what we can have certainty around, right? We connect with setting our day, our routine, moment by moment, sometimes if that's all we can navigate, morning by morning, afternoons and afternoon chunks, creating some sort of certainty that today I'm going to have a phone call with my family member. Today I'm going to have a lunch with my husband or my friend or my mother or whatever it is. But where we start to put in things that we can have certainty over, we can control. There's something inside of us that feels like, okay, if I can accomplish this and get this done, we start to build our resilience up again. We start to build up our stores a little bit. Now, it's important to understand that sometimes we don't recognize that we exhaust ourselves and we need rest. Rest is different from sleep, okay? All of this is overwhelming for our energy. And many of us are feeling more fatigued lately. When you get a diagnosis, you also feel more fatigued. When you're going through your treatment, you also feel more fatigued because it's requiring that much more energy from you. So what I would say is make sure that you give yourself space for rest. Rest doesn't mean I sleep 7 hours at night. Rest means today I'm going to go sit on that sofa for 5 minutes and I'm going to just put my feet up and breathe. Or today I'm going to go outside. I'm going to go for a walk for 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'm going to, bring myself back down again. But I'm going to give myself space for rest. And when you have that time for rest, if all of a sudden you have time, an hour or 2 hours, you have time for rest, it isn't about filling it with something in your calendar and saying, great, I have the time, now I'm going to do something. No, take that time for rest and rebuild your energy stores. Load them up. Save them for a day. Give yourself that extra energy back. Put it in your energy bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I feel like maybe we should all have a jar and kind of make a visual aid
Yeah.
of that energy bank to force yourself even visually to and give yourself that rest, that hour, that 5 extra minutes while you're on the prayer mat, or few extra seconds hugging your little toddler or kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe
Take
something that
5 extra
will help.
minutes. Yeah, take
Yeah.
5 extra minutes in a shower. Use
Yes.
a nice, beautiful body scrub that actually you can feel the salt scrubs on your skin. So you feel I'm connected back with my body, and the scent helps soothe the sense of smell, the sense of touch. Washing the water, rinse off your body, washing that energy and that the pain that we may be feeling, the overwhelm we may be feeling, actually visually wash it, wash off of you. So many things that we can do just to connect back with ourselves.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tanya. I've learned a ton from you, and honestly, the biggest takeaway for me is that if you are going through a situation like this, especially even with everything being stressful and uncertain everywhere, treat it like you're training for a marathon, not a sprint. You pause
Yeah.
when you're tired, you take rest, you take a sip of water, and you run when you have the energy. That just rewiring our mindset to think of it this way maybe will help a little bit. It's not easy, it's not an easy journey, but we have
No,
to give ourselves some grace, like everything else out there. Thank you so much,
absolutely.
Dr. Tanya. This
You're
is
very welcome.
absolutely great. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
for having me.
everyone. Of course, thank you for joining us, and thank you everybody for joining us. We know it's not easy to commit to something like this in the midst of everything that's going on. So thank you for joining us. This is, like I said, it's part of a weekly series. Next week, same time, we're going to have another session with another very capable expert from the LightHouse Arabia. So please join us, follow our accounts, the Women's Pavilion on Instagram, so you know who's the speaker. The topic this time is about supporting women who are going through mental health challenges, which I think that pool of women is becoming bigger and bigger with everything that's going on. So hopefully we see a lot more of you next week. And
Excellent.
until then, take care of yourself, stay
Thank
safe. Thank
you.
you, Dr. Tanya. We'll talk
Take
soon.
care.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.